We are here in Skillful Living and Artful Life. I am Virna Lisa, your host, and today's guest is Tommy Royce. Hi, Tommy. We're hoping that the cats come in and
Hello.
do a guest appearance as well. We'll see if we can get Susie out here. All right, so Tommy and I met in probably one of the most unusual situations, but it's part of life, right? You would say that, right? Yeah, I met Tommy
hmm
because he reached
Definitely.
out to me when he became the chaplain from my mother's hospice service. And so I was kind of surprised. I was like, okay, I guess we're getting closer to that point of her journey. And what was wonderful was that Tommy and I immediately got into a conversation without any hesitation. He was asking me about my mother. And I was giving him a little bit of feedback on her. And then I asked him what denomination he was a part of in his chaplaincy. And then we just started talking. Actually, it was more of a philosophical conversation, right? We got into a philosophical conversation about death and then what he could do to be of service to my mother. And I started talking about reading the Psalms to her, and the Psalms were written by quite a few people. There were a lot of people. A lot of people had their hands in the Psalms, but I like King David.
Sure.
I like King David and Solomon. They're kind of my.
True.
They're my. They're the most popular guys, right? Um,
hmm
and so then we just kind of moved on into conversation. We had multiple conversations because every time he would go to visit her, he would contact me. And then we would have some other philosophical conversation about what was going on. And I said, would you like to be interviewed? And he was like, yeah. So here we are. And thank you very much for taking time out on your day off. I think it's going to be,
Yeah.
I think it's going to be enlightening for folks. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I know I have, a unique role and uh doesn't have a lot of exposure until you're kind of in it.
So what drew you? Was there something that tugged at you because of your background, which we're going to get into, that drew you into find yourself in the role of a chaplain?
Mhm. Well, I like to say that I didn't find chaplaincy, chaplaincy found me. Um, when I was a teenager and getting ready for college, the only thing I knew that I was deciding was that I wanted to pursue, religious leadership and ministry as a career. And at that time, the only vision for that I really had was congregational ministry. So being a pastor at a church, um, I didn't have an imagination for other ways to participate in religious leadership. And so um, my path of, going to college and then going to seminary, which is, the master's level for religious studies. I've mostly had congregational ministry on my mind because that was all I knew. And then at the by the end of seminary and graduation coming up, um, I became somewhat unsettled with the idea of joining a church as a pastor.
And so, did that always resonate with you from the time that you were a child? And obviously, that might have been why you felt like you wanted to go into ministry, leadership, and that. Speak to that a little bit because I know that eventually you found yourself kind of going, okay, I'm going to go to school, which I want you to go into as well. But can we start with that? Like, what was it that struck you when you were a child about being born into an evangelical home and then your schooling and your childhood and then what led to college? And feel free to roll with it.
Sounds great. Yeah, so I was born in Dayton, Ohio, um, with um, shortly before I was born, my parents, no one in my family was religious, but my parents became born again evangelical Christians. And then I was born and was the only child in the whole family raised
Wow.
uh, religiously. Um, and so that was my world. And I went to Christian school and went to church. It was a mega church, 2,000 plus congregants. Um, um, and, for a long time, it was just kind of what I did. It wasn't particularly special to me until I got into high school. And uh, I had this great youth minister who just inspired me, and he really lived a life that I admired, and that made me think, what do I
Mm-hmm.
want with my own life as a, young teenager? And I kind of thought, I kind of want to to live the way he lives, and so maybe I should pursue the same path. Um, but there was so much two things happening at once, I guess. There was a lot I resonated with and a
Hmm.
lot I didn't resonate with all at the same time. On the one hand, I was deeply uh, inspired and drawn to my faith in Jesus and the teachings of Christ and the life of love and spirituality um, that that the faith promotes. On the other side of the same thing, I didn't always resonate with some of the more specific teachings within it. Um, I I remember the very first thing that just didn't connect with me. I was in, so I'm 34, so I was in fifth grade when 9/11 happened. Um, and I remember, I mean, it was obviously terrible, but very quickly our nation moved into it's time to go to war. And, I was a fifth grader. I didn't have the most nuanced vision of the world, but it was instantly just weird to me thinking like, I thought we were the turn the other cheek, love your enemies people. And, now we're talking about going to war. And it just like, I was a kid, but there was
Right.
some sort of disconnect that started um, there for me. And then eventually I learned, that I realized, oh, our church doesn't have any, women pastors, and uh, or the ones that do don't ever preach in front of everyone. Uh,
What age were you when you
uh,
started thinking about that? There weren't any female pastors.
Probably high school, so yeah, high school. Um, and then different, there's they had exclusive views um, on the LGBTQ community, um, and then different. I noticed everyone, kind of had political differences with myself, and it felt like I was the only one in the whole community that saw things differently. And so there was so much I was very uh, not connecting with.
Yeah.
It it still that I still carry that with me sometimes because at so many people that experience what I experienced either continue uh, with the fundamentalist Christianity that they were given,
Mhm.
or they walk away
Right.
from religion entirely. And I live in this weird middle where I embraced religion fully, but also took deconstructed and walked away from a lot of parts of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Another thing we have in common. So then you found
Yeah.
yourself at what? So basically, you knew like in grade school and then going into high school and then you went to college. And all this time, you're seeing more of the disparities between what you believe to be true for you and what you're being taught. So you get out of college and you decide what?
So I went to college in Florida at a little Christian school to study, to major in theology, and I had no plan afterwards. Um, I I probably should have gone to grad school right away, but I was burnout and I just wanted to go home, and I moved home without a plan. So back to Dayton, Ohio, and um, just through uh, friendship, I reconnect with someone that worked at the Christian high school that I attended, and he said, oh, you're back home. Oh, you have a degree in, theology and the Bible. We could offer you a position to teach Bible at the high school. Um, and that was not my plan at all, but since I had no plan, I figured I should take a job that felt more like a career than just looking for the next, uh, just than having no plan at all. So I ended up taking it. Um,
Hmm.
and I ended up working there 8 years. So I was, fresh out of college. And, that would have been 2013 and worked there till 2021.
Your favorite part about working with them?
So throughout those years, I taught every high school age. So, but it was just a high school teaching position. I definitely, um, I think I most enjoyed teaching juniors and seniors because I could get a little more, uh, I guess, philosophical with them or talk more concepts. Um, and what I really wanted to do and what I did for a long time was I tried to be the teacher that I wanted. Um, that was I was alone in having some thoughts that were a little outside the box of the fundamentalist upbringing um, I was given, and I wanted to help some of those students feel a little less alone um, that were thinking the same way. And I wanted to also challenge students who maybe were a little more uh, unquestioning. Um, and it wasn't like I was just in there poking and prodding all their, trying to crush their worldview. I was motivated by my love of my faith and how um, these were. It was important because it was so important for me to really wrestle with all the topics within my faith that I wanted to give that gift to others.
What shifted it for you? I mean, because
Um,
it's very rewarding to touch the hearts of people, and even more so when you're working with young minds that you know that you're impacting them and the choices that they're going to make. I mean, there's nothing like touching a life like that because you know that there are seeds that you've put there that hopefully one day will germinate and they'll look back and go, gosh, it was great working with my teacher Royce. What was it that you felt that brought you to the point where you're like, I'm not doing this anymore? What was it?
so uh, so I felt like the beginning of the end was in 2016 with the election of President Trump. Um, there was a shift in conservative Christian culture at that time, where it was there was a elements of just politics started to enter every conversation um, in a way that I felt, at least in my experience, in my perspective, it hadn't before. Um, that there was greater charge in every subject, and um, that there was greater sense of identity placed on your political leanings than before. I felt like growing up, you were a Republican, you were a Democrat, but if you were, there were other things about you that were more central to your identity. But I feel like starting in 2016 and in that election and in those years of presidency, it became, I would almost, criticize a lot of people in the community thinking these people are their political identity is more central to them than their religious identity. They would these and I felt the conflict with the parents. I mean, they would never say this out loud, but the way they were operating by what they were saying and valuing, it felt like if they had to choose, they would rather their child become an atheist and stay Republican than be a devoted Christian and be
Wow.
very liberal. It's that's how central things felt. It felt that uh important to the it almost felt like the point of what we were doing was to be this. It felt more political than not. um so my wife and I, we got married in May of 2020. So it was the pandemic was new. It wasn't even, it wasn't, I mean, once the masks got popularized, everyone did it for a while without complaining, and then everyone started complaining afterwards. But there was a couple months where um it wasn't something everyone had on all the time at the very beginning. Um but anyways, so we got married then, and my wife and I, uh as I was, as you'd imagine, she was like me on the more progressive side of viewing the world. And the loneliness that I felt, you
Hmm.
know, started to become hers as well. Um, and the pandemic really brought so many issues to the surface in a way that they were becoming closer and closer to the surface over, I would say, starting in 2016. But by 2020, I felt like these issues in my
Hmm.
community where I felt like I could agree to disagree with them, um,
Right.
weren't that wasn't justifiable anymore. Um, and the that timeline, we were on our COVID friendly honeymoon in May, and while we were uh, during that is when George Floyd died. Um, and so you have, it was an election year, it was the pandemic, it was Black Lives Matter movement. You had all these things, kind of this perfect storm of really important social issues. And for us, if the way we saw it was that the only way to be faithful to our spiritual beliefs was to, take the pandemic as seriously as possible, to protect and love others, to support things like the Black Lives Matter movement, because Christianity tells us to favor and love those who are vulnerable. Um, and um, pre politically, we were more progressive than
Right.
almost everyone we knew in our community. And experiencing that together, my wife and I had, quite frankly, it was an existential crisis. It was a realization that, okay, we were kind of in a way on autopilot, just living in our hometown, being in the community we're from. Um, and it gave us the space to realize, the life is too short to just
Hmm.
stay put if you're not happy. And we talked about moving, and we decided, that it was people would say moving was risky, but we saw the greater risk was to stay put and just hope we would eventually be happy.
Right.
Um, and so we decided to move, and we both just always had a draw to live in a big city. Um, and so we spent basically a year. So starting in 2020, we spent 2020, that last half of 2020 and the first half of 2021, thinking about, applying to jobs and visiting different cities and um, trying to make a decision on what we should do. And as working at a school, I had a deadline of, okay, I'll finish this school year and we'll move in the summer. Like that was
Right.
kind of,
Right.
it was kind of, we was able to be clean like that. So,
Right.
yeah, we ended up choosing New York, because we both have always loved it. I visited many times growing up, and um, even the first time I visited here, when I was a teenager, I had this deep down sense that I'm going to live here one day. I don't know why. It just
So,
sometimes your heart tells you the future, whether you believe it or not,
yeah,
and it just felt right.
excellent. And so then once you got here, you decided that you were going to go back to school. You decided,
Uh,
okay, I'm going to go become a chaplain. You had to come to New York to do that.
yeah. Yeah. And so I learned about chaplaincy, and if for those who don't know, being a chaplain is like being a uh, minister, but instead of working at a church or a congregation of whatever your religion, has, synagogue, etc., you work for an institution. And so one of the primary ways of being a chaplain is being a healthcare chaplain. And so I think most chaplains I know as friends are hospital chaplains. And so they go to the hospital every day and visit patients. But I am a hospice chaplain, and so um, what I do is I schedule visits with the hospice patients on our program, and I provide pastoral and spiritual care. Um,
Hmm,
and whether that means visiting them at their home, or nursing home, as your mother's case was, uh, and sometimes hospital. Sometimes I do end up doing hospital visits, but it's just for the patients on our program.
right, right. And what would you say, what what helped you make that choice between, like you said, initially you thought you'd like to be a pastor of a congregation, and then you
hmm
said, no, I'm going to be a chaplain. What was it that helped you make that shift? Because hospice chaplaincy is very intense.
Yeah.
This is intense.
Um,
I would imagine chaplaincy is another level of intensity. I would think, for me, I think it would be.
yeah, and I understand that, and it is. I don't deny that. It's hard, it's interesting because when you love what you do, the intensity of it is part of part of what makes it special.
Mhm.
But so I mean, there was a very practical element to it where I had graduated from seminary and I had my Master of Divinity degree, and I was working odd jobs, um, um, because I had just moved this city and was finishing school, and um, I applied to many different kinds of positions that were out there, even applying to some churches just in case, because I just wanted a salary and
Right.
health insurance and that. And the hospice chaplaincy reached out to me and interviewed me and offered me the job. So there's a very practical way of it. Like I said, it found me more than I found it, because I spread my right. I spread my net wide with my applications, and even I was hoping, but part of why I was hoping chaplaincy would work out for me as opposed to um, congregational ministry is because of the um, what one aspect of being a chaplain is that it's typically an interfaith kind of position um, that I I visit people of a lot of different backgrounds,
Right.
you know, not just different expressions of Christianity, but we have Jewish patients or Buddhist patients or Muslim patients, and I still provide care for them. And then sometimes my favorite patients can be the non-religious patients who are
Mm.
still open to a chaplain visiting
Right.
them.
Right.
Because it is an optional service that
Right.
a patient or a family member can say no, we don't want a chaplain, but thank you for offering.
Mm.
Um, but um, I love that I get to meet people of all different backgrounds and that I don't have to that I don't have any, there's no sense of, proselytizing or trying to change anyone's opinions on anything. It's more just trying to encourage them as they are with what they believe. And um, I feel like my personality as well is more suited for this version of leadership as opposed to being in front of a group of people and trying to lead a community in a certain direction. Um, I feel more at home, more myself, just being with someone and talking with them about what they're going through and how to support them, as opposed to having a big vision for a group of people and trying to lead them there. It's just not me. It's that's good for some people, but we need. I'm glad my priest is like that because that's important.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
it's an important thing for people to have, but I'm glad I'm not in that position right now.